The night was supposed to be perfect. Grand chandeliers burning gold above the heads of dignitaries, crystal glasses catching the light. The kind of evening that looks effortless from the outside but takes months of royal planning to execute. Buckingham Palace was alive with quiet ceremony, the way it always is when the world is watching and everyone inside knows it. Guests moved through the gilded halls with practiced composure. Conversations were polished, smiles were measured. Everything was exactly as it was supposed to be. And then Princess Catherine walked in. The room didn't erupt. There was no gasp, no dramatic pause in the music. It was subtler than that, and somehow more powerful for it. Conversations slowed. Eyes moved. Heads turned with the kind of instinctive, involuntary attention that can't be rehearsed or manufactured. Because sitting on Catherine's head, tilted just slightly, catching the chandelier light in a way that felt almost deliberate, was a tiara that nearly everyone in that room recognized. Not as jewelry, not as a royal accessory, but as something far older and far heavier than diamonds. As a memory. As a name. As a presence that had no body but filled the room regardless. Diana. The name didn't need to be spoken. It moved through the crowd silently, person to person, the way certain things do when they are felt rather than said. And across that grand, glittering room, standing in her place as Queen Camilla saw it too. What followed wasn't captured on any camera. No photographer caught the exact moment. No palisade documented it in any statement released to the press. But people who were in that room, people who understood the unspoken language of royal symbolism and knew exactly what that tiara represented, say that something shifted in Camilla's expression. Not dramatically, not in the way a film would show it. It was quieter than that. The smile stayed, but it changed quality. It became something that required effort, something that didn't quite reach where it was meant to reach. Because Camilla, more than almost anyone alive, understood exactly what that tiara was. What it carried. What it meant. And most painfully, what it meant that she was standing there as Queen of England while someone else was wearing it. This is not a story about jewelry. It has never been a story about jewelry. People tend to think royal tension is about protocol, about who curtsies to whom, about seating arrangements at state dinners and the precise order of names on official documents. But the real fault lines inside the British royal family run through something much harder to regulate. They run through memory, through legacy, through the slow, relentless accumulation of what people feel when they look at you, and whether what they feel is something you earned or something that will forever belong to someone else. That night, the most powerful woman in the room by title was Camilla. And the most powerful woman in the room by something older and more stubborn than title was wearing a tiara that hadn't been touched in nearly 2 decades before Catherine put it on her head. That gap, between official power and the kind of power that lives in people's hearts, is the real story. And to understand it properly, you have to go back. Not to that banquet. Not even to Diana's death. You have to go back to where the tiara itself begins. The lover's knot tiara was created in 1914. It was made for Queen Mary, a woman of extraordinary discipline and almost severe composure, someone who understood that a queen's value was measured in endurance and dignity above all else. The tiara passed to Queen Elizabeth II, who wore it with the same sense of duty and gravitas that defined her entire reign. In those early years, it was a beautiful object with a notable history. Significant, yes. But not yet mythological. Diana changed that. When the tiara was gifted to Diana, she was barely into her 20s, newly married, and still learning how to navigate a world that had very specific expectations of her and very little patience for the learning curve. She was luminous in public. Everyone agreed on that. But behind the cameras, she was finding that the institution she had married into was colder and more demanding than anyone had prepared her for. The fairy tale that the newspapers were selling was not the life she was actually living. And yet she wore the tiara. She wore it at state banquets when her marriage was quietly disintegrating behind palace walls. She wore it on international tours when the smile she gave the cameras cost her more than anyone watching could have known. She wore it at the kinds of formal events where every movement is observed and catalogued and discussed, and she wore it with a stillness and a radiance that gave nothing away. Those close to Diana mentioned something that most people never knew. The lover's knot tiara is extraordinarily heavy. Not just visually impressive, but physically demanding to wear for any extended period. It causes real discomfort. And Diana, who wore it through some of the most emotionally brutal periods of her life, never once let that discomfort show. She stood straight. She smiled. She looked, to every person watching, like a woman born to wear exactly that crown. That image became something beyond fashion, beyond royal tradition. It became a symbol of everything Diana was beneath the surface. The grace under unbearable pressure. The warmth offered freely even when she was quietly falling apart. The dignity maintained in circumstances that didn't deserve it. Every time she wore the lover's knot, she was telling the world something without words. That she was still standing. That she was still there. That whatever was happening behind those palace doors, she had not been broken. When she died in Paris in August 1997, the tiara disappeared from public view. No announcement was made about it. No ceremony marked its retirement. It was simply gone, placed carefully away, as though even the people responsible for the royal collection understood that putting it on anyone else would be a kind of violation. For nearly 18 years, it sat unseen. A relic of something too raw to revisit. Then Catherine wore it. It was 2015. Catherine, Princess of Wales, appeared at a formal evening event with the lover's knot settled on her head, and the reaction was unlike anything a piece of jewelry had produced in living memory. Editors reached immediately for archive photographs. Side-by-side comparisons spread across every newspaper and every social media platform within hours. Diana at a state banquet, 1985, wearing the tiara, her eyes bright, her chin lifted. Catherine at a palace dinner, 2015, wearing the same tiara, the same quiet confidence, the same quality of warmth that comes through even in a photograph. The resemblance went deeper than appearance. It was something in the bearing, something in the way both women seemed to wear the weight of public life without being crushed by it. The public felt it viscerally, the way you feel things that you can't fully articulate but can't dismiss either. Catherine wasn't imitating Diana. She wasn't performing a tribute. She was simply herself, and herself happened to carry something that reminded millions of people of what they had lost and never fully recovered from losing. For the public, the moment felt like continuation. Like proof that Diana's particular kind of grace hadn't vanished from the world, just transferred. Like the tiara had found the right head again. For Camilla, watching from wherever she stood that evening, the moment meant something entirely different. To understand Camilla's position in all of this, you have to resist the easy version of the story. The easy version makes her the villain, the woman who destroyed a beloved princess's marriage and then ascended to the throne anyway, collecting everything Diana lost as though it were simply available for the taking. That version is emotionally satisfying in a certain way. But it isn't complete. Camilla Parker Bowles spent the better part of 3 decades being one of the most publicly despised women in Britain. Not privately criticized, publicly despised. She was booed at events. Newspapers ran headlines about her that were cruel in ways that would not be acceptable today. When she and Charles finally married in 2005, there were protests outside. British public opinion of her hovered at historic lows for years. She endured all of it with a composure that, whatever you think of her choices, represented something real. She did not retreat. She did not stop appearing in public. She did not give the press the collapse they were clearly waiting for. She waited, and endured, and adjusted, and slowly, incrementally, worked to carve out a place for herself in an institution that had every reason to keep her at its edges. When she finally stood beside Charles at his coronation as king, she had technically achieved what almost no one had believed possible. But resilience and sympathy are different things. And the British public's slow, reluctant, partial warming toward Camilla was never the same quality of feeling as what they had for Diana. It was tolerance, gradually earned. Not love, freely given. And there is a difference that no amount of patience or public service can fully close. When Queen Elizabeth died in September 2022, the question of what would happen to her extraordinary jewelry collection became one of those things the royal world discussed in the particular coded language it reserves for sensitive matters. Camilla, as queen consort, held rank. Protocol gave her the right to choose first from the collection. And almost every royal observer, every palace watcher, every journalist who followed these things closely, assumed she would claim the lovers not without hesitation. She did not. Whether that was her own decision, a quiet act of self-preservation from a woman who understood exactly how the public would react to seeing her wear Diana's most iconic piece, or whether Queen Elizabeth had already arranged the tiara's destination long before her death, is something the palace has never fully clarified. What is clear is the outcome. The lovers not passed to Catherine. And the moment that transfer was confirmed, something closed permanently. In royal tradition, a tiara assigned to a woman stays with her. This is not a guideline or a strong preference. It is a rule with the weight of centuries behind it. There is no mechanism for borrowing, no special occasion that overrides the assignment, no moment grand enough to justify an exception. When the lovers not became Catherine's, it became Catherine's completely, irrevocably, for as long as she holds her place in the family. Camilla received other pieces, significant ones, historically important ones. She was given access to items from Queen Mary's collection, pieces with their own deep lineage and considerable beauty. She has worn them elegantly and correctly and with the kind of studied grace she has spent years perfecting. And every time she has, the public response has been polite at best and indifferent at worst. The cameras record her. The reporters note what she is wearing. And then attention drifts elsewhere. Because the public is not evaluating historical significance when they look at a royal woman's tiara. They are not assessing provenance or gemological value. They are feeling something. And the lovers not makes them feel Diana. Nothing else in any royal vault in Britain produces that specific reaction. No other piece carries that particular charge. And Camilla, who has access to extraordinary treasures, does not have access to the one thing that charge is attached to. That is the architecture of what happened the night Catherine walked into that banquet. Camilla was there as queen. Every formal acknowledgement in that room belonged to her. Every protocol, every seating arrangement, every official hierarchy pointed to her position as the highest-ranking woman present. And none of that, not a single piece of it, could compete with what happened when Catherine crossed the threshold wearing a tiara that turned the air in the room into something electric and old and deeply emotional. People who were present describe a particular quality to the attention Catherine received. It wasn't fawning. It wasn't the performed admiration that public figures sometimes receive from people who are simply playing their role. It was genuine, almost involuntary, the kind of response that bypasses conscious thought and comes from somewhere more instinctive. The kind of response that used to follow Diana into rooms. Camilla noticed. Of course she noticed. She has been navigating rooms where Diana's absence is itself a kind of presence for over 25 years. She understands better than most what it looks like when that particular feeling moves through a crowd. And seeing it move toward Catherine, tiara on Catherine's head, must have stirred something that her public composure was working hard to contain. She held herself together. She moved through the evening with the control she has spent decades cultivating. She smiled, engaged, performed every duty expected of her with the professionalism that has become her defining quality. But insiders who saw her up close that night say something was different beneath the surface. That the effort of the evening was visible in a way it usually isn't. That the composed exterior was costing more than usual. And perhaps the hardest part of all was this. Catherine wasn't trying to make a point. She wasn't wearing the tiara as a statement or a provocation or a carefully calculated move in some internal royal chess game. She was simply wearing something that belonged to her, something she had worn before, on an evening where it was appropriate to wear it. The effect it had, the emotion it stirred, the comparisons it triggered, none of that required any intention on Catherine's part. It simply happened, the way things happen when an object carries enough history and enough feeling. The meaning made itself without anyone having to manufacture it. That might actually be the most difficult thing for Camilla to absorb. A deliberate slight can be responded to. A calculated provocation has edges you can push back against. But something that simply is, something that produces its effect automatically, without effort or malice, something like Diana's memory attaching itself to a piece of jewelry and then reattaching itself to the woman now wearing that jewelry, that has no response. There is nothing to counter. There is no argument to make. The feeling exists or it doesn't, and in that room, it existed fully. There is a particular kind of loneliness in being the most officially powerful person in a space and still feeling like the one who is on the outside of something. Camilla has the title that Diana never held. She has the residence, the formal authority, the recognition of governments and institutions around the world. She has everything that protocol can give. And in the economy of symbols that the royal family actually runs on, the one currency that matters most, the kind of love that doesn't need to be explained or justified or earned through decades of careful behavior, that still gravitates toward someone else. Toward Catherine. Toward the memory of Diana that Catherine, perhaps without even trying to, carries forward. The evening ended. The guests filed out into the London night. The chandeliers were dimmed. The lover's knot tiara was carefully lifted from Catherine's head, wrapped, and returned to its case. By morning it was a news story. By afternoon it was a cultural moment. The photographs spread everywhere. The comparisons restarted. Diana's name trended alongside Catherine's in a way that happens every time the tiara appears and probably always will. And Camilla woke up the next morning as Queen of England. With every formal power that title carries. With a place in history that is already secured, whatever the newspapers say about her. But somewhere in the distance, settled in its case in a royal vault, sits a tiara that will never be hers. That was never going to be hers. That carries a name she has spent her entire adult life existing in the shadow of. And no title, no ceremony, no number of public appearances done with quiet grace and genuine professionalism, can change the geography of that shadow. Some things are not about what you hold. They are about what holds people. Diana held the British public in a way that did not end with her life. It transferred, quietly and without instruction, to the woman her son chose, and to the piece of jewelry her son's wife now wears. That transfer was not planned by anyone. It could not have been planned. It is simply what happens when someone leaves a mark deep enough to survive them. The tiara catches the light. The room turns. And somewhere in that turning, in that instinctive, unchosen response from people who never met Diana but somehow still miss her, is the answer to every question about why that particular piece of jewelry matters so much, why that particular evening landed so hard, and why, for Camilla, no crown she is ever given will quite fill the space that one leaves behind.